In today's episode, you're going to learn why it's important for men to get reconnected with their feminine energy. Welcome to the Father, Sons, Brothers podcast, where we have courageous conversations that support men to level up their health, wealth, and relationships. And today's guest, Aaron Kleinerman, is really going to be able to support you to be able to reclaim your power by reconnecting to your feminine. Aaron is a transformational sex and relationship coach who comes from a marine background where he was a skipper, supporting himself and the world that he worked in to navigate the world of the open water and the open seas. And he now helps souls navigate their way through life. In this episode, Aaron dives into what the importance is and the power that is reclaimed when men reconnect to their feminine. Now, if you've never heard about that before, or that sounds super weird, or you don't know anything about it, then this episode is really going to be for you. And the reason is because as a man, you have access to both masculine and feminine energy. And most of us spend a lot of our time understanding what it's like to be in the masculine, accessing our masculine power, purpose, direction, getting things done. But if you're not connected to some of your more feminine energy, you're losing access to about 50% of your life force power. When you get reconnected to this feminine power, you can allocate this additional power to be able to level up your life, whether it's your relationships, your money game, your health, your body, your sex life. And it's a really, really powerful way for men to reclaim this power and to level up their lives. We also talk about how it looks for men that are not connected to their feminine, problems with addiction, sex addiction, continually looking for validation in their romantic partners, specifically in women. Men that are not connected to their emotional bodies and the challenges of what this creates. Aaron talks about the relationship between the head and the heart and how when you reconnect these parts, it really levels up your ability to be able to be an empowered and heart-led leader. We talk about sex magic and how to be intentional with your ejaculations and why so many men have such a weird relationship with their semen or their seed, and just what happens when you reconnect to this part. We love having conversations that push the needle and that feel uncomfortable because a lot of the growth is inside these uncomfortable conversations. And so if any of this sex magic, connecting with your feminine, getting reconnected to your semen and your seed sound weird and out there, there's potentially some growth in this episode for you. I'm excited to share this conversation with Aaron Kleinerman and really so grateful that he took the opportunity to show up on this podcast. Below this episode, inside the show notes, is also a link to Aaron's book called The Embodied Man. He's an author and has written an entire book about integrating the masculine and feminine inside men and living life as an embodied man. So stoked to be sharing this conversation. And without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Aaron Kleinerman. Welcome to the show, bud.
Yeah, nice to be here, bro.
Couple technical challenges. This is our second take, but good to have you here. Share with our audience what lights you up, what's been keeping you busy the first part of this year, and what you've been working on, and what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, love that question. I think generally what gets me out of the bed is just a continual, driving forward. A lot of the work I share in transformational spaces, and helping both myself and lots of people around the world waking up. How do we wake the fuck up? How do we step forth into a new paradigm of being on this planet? And I think one of the things that drives me forward is helping people, you could say, master the human experience so that more of the wisdom inside of all of our souls gets to be expressed and shared and exemplified out into the world.
What are some of the methods that you use to help people wake up and maximize their human experience? Like, what are some of the teachings that are part of your programs that you facilitate?
Yeah, so I do a lot of kind of somatic therapy. I help people take concepts out of the mind and into the body. I'm sure people listening and maybe yourself can experience the times in our lives when we understand a concept around something, but then when the decision making happens, we're still sometimes making decisions as if we're a young 14 or 15-year-old, and the body hasn't actually caught up with the awareness of the mind. So a lot of the practices I do, and things that I've shared in my book as well, is helping people kind of get out of the mind and more into the body. It's not that the mind goes away. We still listen to the mind, but we utilize the different centers of the body for deeper listening and actually tuning in more to the deeper edges and the places inside the body of like how and what's actually going on inside. Just today I'm here in Aruba right now for a good buddy's wedding, and I was having a chat with one of the family friends, and he was just discussing about some of the stress he was feeling in his body and how his stomach responds sometimes in having stomach pain. And I was just explaining how, stress makes a direct representation in the body, because if we're not breathing and sounding and expressing a lot of the past ailments and the traumas that we've held on to, then our body starts to take form into cancer, into disease, into stomach pain, into all the different ailments, simply because we're not letting the energy that we've gone through actually express through our system.
Mm. What's the cause of that? Like, let me go back to the first part of my question. What gets us to a place where we have a different level of experience in the body that we do in our mind? What is that disconnect?
Well, I think the biggest disconnect is for so many people at a very young age, what we're taught by society is logic, reason, understanding. And logic, reason, understanding are all the concepts and the understandings of our cognitive mind. And so as we move forward in life, a lot of what's high in values with mathematics and science and, doing well in our society is about, do we understand the world well? Can we explain concepts well? Can we analyze problems well? All these other things. A lot of body-based knowledge isn't something that's high on the values for a lot of individuals. So the best way that we start is just simply by beginning to listen more deeply. And to listen more deeply, and this is especially true for male bodies listening, it's about taking away all the addictions that get us in the way of actually listening to our body. So the alcohol and the drugs and, even maybe the excessive plant medicine and the coffee and the nicotine and all the things that actually numb us. This is numbing us from being able to listen deeply to what the body's trying to tell us.
Hey, FSB crew, a quick message to say 97% of you who watch or consume this podcast are not subscribed. Subscribing to the show really supports us to be able to grow and reach more people, as well as include and improve the quality and caliber of guests that we have on this show. Our goal is to get this number down to 70%. And so if you have ever received any value from the content and conversations on this podcast, please consider subscribing. It really supports us and the work that we're doing. Now, back to the show. And so for someone listening and maybe interested in going on a journey to get rid of some of those things and start listening to the body, what's the path? What is the body trying to tell us? How does somebody know what the body's trying to tell us if we haven't been listening? What would we hear?
Yeah, again, great question. I mean, I think one of the first things to do is to notice when stress or when anger or when issues arise. If you're listening, you find yourself being triggered by something, there's an upset that happens in your body. What's the first thing that you do? Do you reach for the beer? Do you reach for the weed? Do you reach for TV? Do you reach for social media? Do you reach for something rather than just sitting with and being with the energy and the sensation that's happening inside the body? And when we can just be with that energy, doesn't mean we need to push it away, doesn't mean it's going to go away. It just means we need to be present with the sensation, the experience that's happening in our body. And the more we do that, the more we can actually start to tune in to listen more deeply to what's coming up, to what's alive, to what's present. And the same way, a dog, those of you that are dog owners, after a dog sees a storm or gets scared, a dog goes to the corner and it shakes its body. It goes, ah! It releases some of the stored, stuck energy. And so if our bodies have gone through our entire lifetime without shaking and expressing and moving, then there's a lot of condensed, coagulated energy in our system that's inhibiting us from actually being able to be present. Being present means that I'm not future projected fantasy in the things that I'm trying to find in the future, and I'm not, very associated to all the issues and the resentments and the guilts of the past. I'm being present here and now with what is. But to be present with what is, that means that I'm present with what's alive in my body. What's the feeling? What's the sensation? What's the pain? What's the happiness? What's the sadness? What's the joy that I'm feeling? And can I just simply be with that without trying to do anything other than that?
Hmm. You mentioned triggers as a part of the experience of what we're going through. What is underneath a trigger? What is it that makes somebody feel triggered by something? And yeah, recognizing it and then not avoiding it. I get that part. What is it that causes somebody to be triggered by an experience or by their partner or something like that?
Well, triggers are treasures. Triggers are treasures that are leading us back home into the safety of our own body. They're the treasures that are um, indicating that something is happening inside of us. So if I'm triggered, if you do something and I find myself saying, I'm upset because Gareth did this, I'm upset because he's like this, I'm upset because blah, blah, blah. All that's doing is in that situation, I'm upset because you've done something. Ultimately, you're being a catalyst for triggering a physiological or a somatic response in my body that's creating a certain indication of a change in my own physiology. At that moment, when I find myself triggered, there's often an emotion. There's a rising of energy. Our nervous system is rising from a parasympathetic to a sympathetic. So sometimes we might want to fight, or we might want to run away, or we might want to freeze, all these different responses that happen in our body. And so the trigger is actually just indicating to us that something about this situation is reminding me, if I was getting triggered by you, it's reminding me of something from my past that I haven't learned to love, honor, and appreciate. And the premise of that is that the body, these bioelectric, magnetic, vibrating machines that we're in, are made up of positive cells and negative cells. So the positive cells and negative cells, if there's things in my past that I haven't learned to love, honor, and appreciate, then the reason I'm getting triggered by them in my present day moment is because literally I'm attracting that situation to remind me of what I didn't love about the past, which is why a lot of people have the same partner over and over and over again, just with a different name, or they keep hitting their head against the same brick wall over and over and over again because they're not actually asking the right question to heal the trigger at the root. This is the work that I do. I help bring the unconscious conscious so that people can heal the triggers, heal the trauma at the root. And we're not just going to circulate around it and sitting in, therapy for the next 10 years. We're actually going to dive into the core of it, feel what we need to feel, say what we need to say, and actually clear through what has been held in our body for probably a lifetime.
Mm, yeah, I love that. In some of the work that I do, like the idea of understanding how we create our reality, the analogy of our field creates our form, meaning that in order for us to shift the world around us, which is a representation of our relationship to our partners, to the world, to money, for example, is a function of how we're holding the frequency inside ourselves. So, how could you describe to someone or support somebody that recognizes that they've been triggered for two things? How do they shift their state into perhaps a more positive and grounded state? And what's the way to be able to reflect and to honor? Like, what would be a practice if I notice that I'm triggered by something? Obviously, there's week-long workshop with you, reading your book, those are types of things. But practically, what are some things that I could do to be able to accept and honor those past experiences when I realize they're coming up in the present?
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you mentioned with the state change. So, there's definitely simple practices that you can do, and I'll speak into that in a minute. The state change is the recognition of being able to see the current situation that we often are only seeing on a certain level, being able to see it through different lens. But the only way that we change the lens of our perception is when we ask ourselves the right questions so that we can begin to expand and showcase the neural pathways of our brain that we haven't actually gone down yet. So we shift our lens, I would say less from going into a positive direction and more to an equanimous state, to a state where we can become present for both sides of the coin. Because a lot of people, the thing that we thought was so terrible, until we see the advantages of it, then it's probably still, leading and running our lives. And so beginning to see both sides of the spectrum lets us start to recognize, okay, this is actually happening for me. The universe is happening for me, not against me. So when something bad happens, it's recognizing, well, what are the advantages? And when something really amazing happens, it's not to take it down, but it's also to recognize that there are just as many disadvantages in something positive as there are advantages in something that we deem negative. And then when we can see both of these things, what happens is that we take that awareness and it drops down into our body, into our heart. And this is where the practices of moving and shifting and expressing our body differently start to come into action. Because as I was saying before, we can understand concepts in the mind, but then our body sometimes responds differently. So the first process of this, and this is really the journey I take people on in through my book, is first about like balancing and equilibrating the mind, and then beginning to come into the emotional expression. So one of the practices that somebody can do to heal and to clear their emotional body is when that trigger comes up, see what it reminds them of, and then maybe they find themselves back, in their awareness as a young 10-year-old, and their dad said something that they were frustrated with that they didn't actually express. That's not fair, Dad. And you let your body express. You shake, you move the energy that you probably didn't have a chance to do as a young child. And the more that you're doing that, it's healing and clearing those past memories and bringing you more and more present. You have a lot of men that listen to this. A really healthy quality for masculinity is presence. I'm sure a man listening has heard one time or another, I want you to be more present with me. Why aren't you present? What are you thinking about? Where are you? And most people aren't present because some things are happening and their mind is reverberating back into a moment in the past. So we're not actually here listening because we're still stuck on all the things that we wanted to be different in our past. So we heal that and we clear that by doing the timeline regression, by doing the somatic therapy, by doing the gestalt work, by doing the work that helps us heal and clear the things in our past so that we can create a life more aligned to who we know we're meant to be.
There's that saying that you can only be triggered if you're loaded. Like the sense of being able to shift and move your energy is a function of your ability to be able to stay calm and stay present. But if you're always up to your eyeballs in old stories and old traumas that are potentially holding you in the present moment, you're very close to being triggered by that same experience in your reality again. So yeah, when you spoke about the dog that went into the corner to shake out of the storm. Is that a practice that you would suggest for somebody who feels triggered to be able to move their energy? Or what could somebody do if they notice that they were triggered in the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a very simple, easy practice. Like if someone's triggered in a moment or they're driving in traffic and someone's cut them off, take one hand over the other and go, "Ooh." Give a little hand stream, a shake of the body, a movement of the energy. And it's not that that's trying to push it away. It's just so that when the next moment comes and you need to make a decision, you're making a decision from less of a triggered, upset self and more of a present, equilibrated being. And the more consistently someone does that, then the better. I mean, there's a great, very simple practice. Actually, that my friend here in Aruba, this was a practice I was recommending to him because I did this, I remember the first time for 30 days straight, and it really changed my reality. It's a practice I have outlined in my book as well. I call it everythingness and nothingness. So you put a timer on your phone for 5 minutes in the morning. And for 5 minutes, you go into movement, you go into sadness, you go into anger, you just move the body, but not from a calculated cognitive way. You move your body just in the unknown. Maybe there's a shaking out. Maybe there's a opening of the jaw. There's a releasing of the tongue. There's whatever wild, ecstatic energy wants to move through you for 5 minutes. 5 minutes is not a lot of time in the morning. That alarm goes off at the end of the 5 minutes. You then put another alarm on, you hit start again, and then you sit in a silent observatory meditation. This is more of the witnessing without judgment. This is more of the, you could say, the healthy masculine pole of the stillness, of the silence, of being aware of your past self that just erratically moved a lot for 5 minutes, of all the things that are happening in your life, and you just sit in a silent meditation. What this practice is doing is training the two polarities that are inside you, whether you're male body or female body. The everythingness is letting the feminine expression move and shake and vibrate and let all that come through. The sitting in silence is letting the witnesser without judgment and the masculine essence cultivate more of that. Then, if you've done that through the day, later on in the day, when your wife or your girlfriend or your husband or whoever it may be is crazy and flipping out, you're less judgmental of the chaos because you know the chaos inside of you. We have an
Mm-hmm.
empathy for it rather than, oh my God, this is crazy. It's not crazy because you were expressing the crazy in the morning practice. And you
Right.
also have a greater capacity to witness the crazy because you cultivated more of that 5 minutes of just witnessing the world without judgment. So, what you do by doing a practice like that is you cultivate more of your capacity to witness, to be present, and to know empathetically the crazy on the outside and the crazy on the inside.
Such a great tip. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, let's get into your book. You wrote a book called The Embodied Man. What is that about? What was the desire to want to create this work and put it out into the world? And what's the who should read this? Every man?
Yeah, every man for sure, when I wrote the book, I wrote it for the perspective towards men. And I was curious how book sales would go and how things would come out. It's been out for over 2 years. When I came out initially, it was a international bestseller in 7 countries, and blew up around the world, and still continues to do very well. Audible version just came out a couple weeks ago. I wrote it towards the perspective of man because I know if I didn't, then a man wouldn't actually pick it up and read it. Whereas I know if I wrote it towards like all beings, men would like, no, that's not written towards me. I wrote it towards
Mm-hmm.
man, and still 50% of the sales have been from female bodies. So it's really a
Mm.
book for all humans. I mean, there's over 40 practices in this book. It's not just all about practices, it's a lot of my own storytelling through my adventures, through my journeys, to the time I've almost died, to the times I've, fallen flat on my ass over and over and over again. And it's the lessons that I've learned, as well as the specific practices that people can do in the comfort of their own home to make a trajectory and a change in their own life. I run retreats all over the world, and I love when people come to retreats, but there's no way on earth that every human can ever get to, all the retreats and things I run. But I know a lot of humans can, pay $25 for an Audible book or a book on Amazon to be able to make an actual quantitative change in their life. So this is definitely written towards men, to become more out of the mind into the body. But it's really a deep journey of somatic therapy. It's a deep journey of mastering life in a way that, our soul awakens by the end of it. And that's chapter 10, is like awakening soul wisdom. It's for all beings who want to master the human experience and really wake up to more of what this life is about.
So good. When you spoke about the fact that you have the embodied man in the title, and yet only 50% of your sales come from men, to me, that points to something around the fact that men tend to not invest in their personal development or in retreats in the same way that women do. Have you found that to be true?
Absolutely. I mean, I run a lot of men's retreats. I do a lot of work with men, and probably 75 to 80% of the clients I work with are specifically men. But if I look at the greater scale of transformational work and retreats and things, for sure, it's at least, I'd say it's probably like a 60-40, or maybe like a 65-35 split in terms of what I see out there in the industry. I mean, I've been working in this field for 16 years. I did a master's degree in spiritual psychology, in my early 20s. I worked a lot in the kind of mindfulness world, more around self-development and those pieces. And then in the last 8-9 years, really a much deeper dive into Tantra. I mean, there's definitely men in the field, but in general, I find women are much more trying to bring their partners and their boyfriends and,
Right.
all of the other beings into this world to support them in that way.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I would have. Yeah, I'm not maybe as close to it, and I haven't been in it for as long as you, but I've got a sense that it might have even been more, like maybe 80-20, in terms of 20% of men in the whole market are potentially looking at it. But yeah, that's interesting.
That could be more accurate. Yeah, I mean, I'd say in the circles I'm in, generally retreats and things, there's always quite a few more women, which is funny because a lot of men like are single and trying to meet women and things like that. And like, just come to a retreat, and there's so many women saying, "Where are all the conscious men? Where are they? I'm looking."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. What got you on this path in the first place? How do you in your early 20s decide I want to go into personal development? Was there something specifically that happened in your life, or what was the call that put you onto this particular path?
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely many kind of milestones along the way. I'm a ship's captain by trade, so kind of come from a maritime military world. But even before I went there, I mean, when I was 14, again, one of the stories I share in my book, I counseled my father out of his gambling addiction. It was about a 3-hour trip from Boston up to New Hampshire to go visit my sister at university. Gambling had pretty much plagued his life from, ever since I was old enough to be aware. And I just had a very, clear, conscious conversation with him. I was 14 years old. I didn't really understand what was going on. I just knew, he was losing a lot of money to gambling and wasn't really always there. And I just spoke to his heart. I kind of reasoned with him as his loving son, saying, "Hey, there's a better way of being in the world." And now, that's what, 20, I just turned 40 this last year. So about 25 years later, he still, hasn't gambled a day in his life since then. So that was a shifting moment. It was a recognition that there was something inside of me that, kind of became more of my family shrink in some ways, and still do. Try not to take that role on as much as I can, but certainly
Uh-huh.
it happens sometimes. Um, and yeah, and then life, ended up bringing me to a maritime academy, mainly because I knew I didn't want to do that for a lifetime, but I wanted to be able to be 22 with a maritime license and work for half of the year and be able to travel half of the year and, have adventures and do more of what I wanted to do in the world. And so, yeah, there were numerous other steps along the way, but I eventually, as I said, I did a master's in spiritual psychology when I was 25, and I always just had a love for human behavior. Humans in general have fascinated me. I've asked the bigger questions as who are we, and why are we here, and what is this world all about? And the more that I've asked those questions, the more I've gotten deeper into the mystery trainings, into the esoteric trainings, into the deeper pontifications about our universal design, and also wanting to take kind of esoteric concepts and ground it into day-to-day life. And that's really what's most fascinating to me, is finding ways to ground, the mystery and the mystical trainings that sometimes Tantra speaks about, a lot of other, lineages and things speak about, into practical day-to-day things that we can make a change in the way in which we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to each other in relationship, to our family, to our work, so we can just be more loving, whole humans that actually love and appreciate life.
How's your relationship with your dad now? Is he still around?
Yeah, he's still around. Yeah, it's good. I mean, we're not like, best buds that talk all the time, but we see each other a couple times a year when I pass through Boston, and we have great conversations. I mean, the thing with my dad I've always loved is, he's a reader. We have great conversations about philosophy and politics and all kinds of things like that. Usually catch up on the local Boston sports teams. That's what he's often kind of surrounding himself with. But yeah, I think the lessons that I learned really from both parents, the thing I would have always wanted to hear from my father was, "I've got this." Like I got this under control, and that was just never there. So what it installed in me was a deep capacity to be extremely independent, know how to get things done, know how to be self-sufficient at a very young age. And I grew up quite quickly. And for a long time, I resented him for that. I had a lot of frustrations for that. And then through doing a lot of this healing work and healing and clearing more and more, I can just generally love him for who he is and not feel like I need to change him and not, shift anything about him, and just, okay, this is who he is. This is how he shows up. And I'm grateful he helped bring me in this world. And for that, I'm eternally grateful.
Hmm. What are some of the challenges you see facing men in the world at the moment? What are some of the things that have got you to a place where you feel like you want to serve men specifically? We've touched on some of the emotional pieces and some of the places where we perhaps are disconnected from the somatic experience of being in a body. What are some of the other challenges you see facing men and masculinity in the world right now?
Well, I think a big one is a lot of men have an experience of walking on eggshells. And the way I define that is, a lot of the world says we need you to be strong and powerful and fierce and, be the man that gets things done and takes care of things. And then at the same time, men are said, but don't be too much, and don't use your cock, in bad ways, and you can't be too strong or too powerful or too this. And so men often have this experience of, where do I go? How do I they tell me to be strong, but not to be too strong. And so I think the challenge for a lot of men is not knowing necessarily where and how they fit in. And so their confidence ends up struggling. They end up in very numbing jobs where they're not fulfilled inside. And then before they know it, they're 50 years old with a big beer gut, and they're shut down, they're empty, and many of them end up taking their lives. I mean, during COVID, male suicide rates went skyrocket because a man that's not on purpose, a man that feels like he doesn't have any resources or things around him, and a man that, feels like he's either too much or he's too little, he can feel very alone, and it can be like, what's the point of even being here? So a real strong initiative for me is supporting men to feel like they can be safe in their body, they can be safe to feel, they can be safe to be powerful. I know you do a lot of men's work as well, and it's just so important to find time where men can come together just with other male bodies. And I want to share the reason, to me, I found this to be so important, and especially a man that's listening, and I'll explain it from a place of polarity. Because like, we're in male bodies, and there's also a feminine essence inside of us, just like there's a yin and a yang and a positive and negative. We're in a male body, but there's still a feminine essence. This feminine essence, for a lot of men, hasn't felt like it's had a chance to grow up and mature and get older through space and time. So a lot of men feel very alone in their emotions because they feel like nobody can actually experience and love and appreciate their emotions. And so when men can come together where two things are on the table: power and vulnerability. The power to look another man in the eyes and say, I see you, brother. Rise, brother. Don't let me push you down. We can both rise together, expressing our power. And two, vulnerability, meaning all of you is welcome. Your tenderness, your tears, all of that is there. When men come together in that way, that feminine essence inside a man can start to grow up and mature more because she feels safe enough to come out in a place where also other men are doing the same. But if that space with other men is ridiculed with competition and blame and shame and all the other things that often get labeled around men coming together and just kind of locker room bullshit talk, then that feminine essence can't grow up. So when those two pieces are on the table, where absolute vulnerability is celebrated and appreciated, and absolute power is celebrated and appreciated, that young, tender feminine in a man's body actually has a chance to grow up and mature and start to become less of a little girl and more of a more integrated teenager and maybe even a young adult, so that that man is more integrated and whole and not looking for love on the outside. He's knowing love on the inside. And this is a challenge, but also one of the beauties of men's work and one of the real important reasons for that. And a lot of men are afraid of going into that because that vulnerability is scary. And they think that they want a partner to hold them in that vulnerability. But if that partner is a female body that doesn't have healthy masculinity that can witness without judgment and be a good space holder, then when the feminine essence in the male body comes out and the female body doesn't have a capacity to actually hold that and witness it and not judge it, then the result is that feminine essence in a man's body goes back into a darker cave than the place that she came from. So really, this is one of the important reasons why men coming together in a safely held way is so important for their integration, evolution, and expansion.
Hmm. So much there. Wow. What how does someone recognize that they may have suppressed their feminine? Someone listening to this who's in a male body, how do they know? What would this feel like or look like for somebody?
Well, the way it would look like is, A, are you riddled with addictions? A immature young feminine in man's body is often reaching for marijuana. She's reaching for cigarettes. She's reaching for alcohol because, and I'll just relate this to my own journey. Like, I coming from a maritime military world, like, I definitely, there was times in my life where you could have called me an alcoholic. There's a lot of alcohol, there was a lot of suppression, there was a lot of numbing. And the reason that that was happening is because there was so much pain and anguish and frustration, especially towards my mom and the childhood that I'd come through. So when I was able to feel all of those emotions, then I found myself no longer reaching for a bottle because I was starting to become more present with my emotional body. So one of the first gateways for a man to start to recognize that his feminine is a bit more young or immature or not grown up is that he's not able to express how he feels. Or also, and I'll be revolutionary here and say that you're okay to have needs as a man as well. That's this other thing that, like, masculine men who are really super over alpha, like, I have no needs. I'm a man. I just get things done and I burn myself out when I'm 45 and 50 because I've just been running on both ends my entire life and I don't even know what a need means. The feminine knows how to express her needs. She knows how to say and ask for what she wants. So if you're a man and you have trouble expressing your needs, you have trouble feeling your emotions, or you find yourself riddled with addictions and anxiety and stress, then there's often a feminine essence, an emotional energy inside that hasn't had a chance to express, to grow up, to begin to become more present in the man's day-to-day life.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I recognize that part in my own journey as well. When a version of me that also hadn't had the space of going into safe, well held containers where men actually get the opportunity to and are encouraged to speak what's genuinely alive for them. I found myself in a place where, like you said, I thought that I always had to have everything together. I didn't want to dump or load my bullshit onto other people or my heavy stories onto other people. And it came out for me in this way of hanging out with men that I love the most. And when they asked about topics that I felt uncomfortable with or that weren't aligned to how I thought they wanted me to be, I would either avoid the conversation or tell like a small white lie to get there. So, for example, having a beer with a friend of mine that's one of my best friends in inverted commas, and he asks me how my business is going when business is going shit, rather than say, I'm really battling with it at the moment, I say something like, yeah, it's going all right. How are things with your business? Like quick diversion to move it. And that for me is, yeah, the inability to be able to speak into what's genuinely going on for me in that moment. And when my when my words don't match my energy, the other person can feel it, whether it's conscious or not. They recognize that something's up, like something wasn't aligned with what I said and what my energetic body was putting out. And whether they can articulate it or not, it's actually impossible to build trust with the people that you love in the relationships that you're in if your words don't match your energy. And so the practice of coming together for men to be able to speak into what's genuinely alive, it doesn't have to be super deep and you know yeah, super sad and these are the worst. It's just genuinely what's actually alive, and bringing that is such a powerful practice. And I recognize that to be part of my journey in the past, the deflection of something because I couldn't speak into what was going on for me.
Yeah, absolutely. When you share that, what it reminds me of, actually coming from the Maritime Academy I went to, our motto there was acta non verba, which means it's the actions that we say, not the words that we communicate. And that
Hmm.
was such a strong, there's other sides of the military world I don't necessarily agree with, but I really resonated with that piece because the actions of how we show up in our day-to-day world mean so much. And of course, the words we say have impact, but when I can be more of the change I want to see rather than just say the things that I think I should do, there's a vast difference. And that being the change is really where I feel like we need more than anything strong, embodied, conscious men that are being the change. Their heart is open. They're not disconnected from their feelings, but they're not so deeply immersed in their feelings that they're just a floating seaweed in the sea. You spend enough time in spiritual communities and things like that, and you see men who have just been, their balls are cut off, and it's like they're just completely in the feminine, floating all around, and they're lost. And so it's not,
Hmm.
and sometimes even for myself, there's definitely a time where I went there, and then it was coming back into that equanimous state where I have an awareness of the power and the certainty and the strength of my masculine. I have an awareness of my intuition, my creativity, my tenderness, my vulnerability, and I let these energies merge and weave together from the center of my heart and show up in the world that way. I think that to me is an embodied man who knows the power of his heart. He knows the power of his cock. He knows how to utilize his cock, but he doesn't overuse his cock to try to gain power over others. He just has it as a powerful force that can bring more love onto this planet, especially with his beloved and his partner. That's the place where a man who is not only connected to the awareness of his mind, the awareness of his heart, but also isn't riddled with the shame and the discomfort of his own sexuality. He knows how to immerse and integrate his sexuality in safe, effective ways without hurting others along the way.
Hmm. I'm glad you touched on intimacy. What is the role that you see, or perhaps the wound that you see around men and intimacy in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think the wound, I mean, it's multifold. I see some very much more like advanced wounds, you could say, where I think one of the deepest traumas that society never really talks about is the male to male sexual abuse that exists all over this world. It's especially strong in certain cultures around the world. I won't go into
Mm-hmm.
those cultures, but that's quite there. And as a result, men get kind of, shut down in their erotic energy. And the other thing that's a wound is, with a man's phallic power, often that phallic power has never really been met with the place of reverence and appreciation. So a lot of men are afraid of their own hard on. They're afraid of, oh my God, I'm hard. If I'm hard and I'm in the wrong place, something bad is going to happen. Oh my God, like that's the worst thing. Because
Mm-hmm.
so much of society thinks a hard cock for a man just is going to rape and pillage a community. And so, what it is for a man is to get more comfortable with his own sexuality, to own the power of his cock, but not in a way that he abuses and manipulates others because of that. And this, as you really get into intimacy and sexuality, it's really where one of the things that I appreciate about Tantra is because it deals with this as well. It's not the only thing. Tantra isn't all about sexuality. It's just one of the pieces that we include and work with in a way that becomes more integrative, because a lot of men, if they've had their eros or their sexuality shut down for a lot of life and then finally they find it, they can become a bit manipulative and abusive with it. So it's not that that's the solution either. It's about actually knowing the power of his eros so that he can self circulate a field of energy with his own erotic channel by not needing to find porn, which is a huge issue with so many men. I think that alone would be an entire podcast.
Yeah.
um, because a lot of men, they outsource all of their erotic interest and sexuality to porn, and then they ejaculate, they have 2 or 3 second sneezes, and they go about their life half asleep at the wheel, and then it just becomes this addictive cycle where they're getting addicted to the all of the hormones that are released in pornography. So any man listening, if you're still watching porn, stop. Like, I know, like, that's tough and it's challenging, but one of the best things you can do in your life is to remove porn from your life. Not to say that there
Mm-hmm.
can't be beautiful, conscious porn that you can watch, but pornography, like, I mean, there's a great book I've been listening to recently called Your Brain on Porn, and it really dives deeper into the results and what's happening. And you're seeing young generation of men, I mean women as well, but we're speaking to men, young boys who, are getting addicted to Viagra and getting addicted to watching porn. And by the time they're, 24, 25 years old, they're already having, erectile issues because they've completely abused their cock for the first, 5, 10 years of their sexuality. It's actually pretty horrific what's happening with that.
Yeah, and porn also gives many of us an incorrect view of what women's pleasure looks like.
Yeah.
How long it takes for a woman to get turned on, exactly what their pleasure looks like, exactly what, intimacy looks like for a woman. So there's that piece. I think the other piece with pornography is that it almost always gets to this place where the man ends every sexual engagement with an ejaculation, which continues to reprogram us to the sense that we need to be ejaculating every time we have a sexual engagement. Is semen retention and the practice of conscious ejaculation something that you talk about and teach, practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've been doing for, yeah, probably the last just about 10 years now. I've gone through different cycles of it. There's breathing practices you can do. There's a lot of ways to work with your semen. I'm not one of these tantra teachers that says thou shall never ejaculate. There's some people out there in the world that kind of vibrate in that way. I do think that it's good about having a conscious relationship with your ejaculation, and also understanding that a man, like, I'm multi-orgasmic. I can have many orgasms in lovemaking and I'm not ejaculating. Like, I tell
Right.
that to a lot of men sometimes, and they're like, What? How? What do you even mean? What? That doesn't
Can
make
you
any
explain that
sense."
anyway for someone listening to this that doesn't recognize what that is? Can you dive into that?
Yeah, for sure. So the ejaculation is you could say, a byproduct that happens in the body as a result of ejaculating to create life. But there's about a 2 to 3 second moment before ejaculation that the body goes into an orgasmic state. So when you can begin to train and to breathe the body to not go into ejaculation and to actually breathe that energy through the whole body, then you can begin to unlock more life force energy. You could call that kundalini, and begin to be more multi-orgasmic. And the result is, especially, like I'm turning 41 in a couple of weeks. And I want to be making love until I'm, 80, 90 years old. There's no reason I wouldn't be doing that. And
Right.
so if I'm ejaculating every day, there's some studies, I don't know if they're real, but, will say that a man only has so many ejaculations. And I
Right.
notice for myself, like if I ejaculate, it's not that I'm like overly tired the next day, but I do notice a change in my own energy. And I find that when I, take that ejaculation and I move it through my whole body, then I want to make love the following day, and I want to make love later on in the day, and I can, make love for 3 to 4 hours. Like, the current beloved I spend time with, we often make love for at least 2 to 3 hours when we come together. Not all the time, but fairly often. Like, love making is a beautiful healing modality that brings us back home into our heart. And it's such a deep way to connect with our loved one, And the reality is most people's love making lasts for 5 to 7 minutes. Like, that's atrocious. Like, and that's on the high.
Uh-huh.
It's just
I mean, I
crazy.
think I think on the same thing, there's this place as well where a lot of men understand that in order to be able to run a marathon, you need to put the miles in and to be able to build up the endurance and to get the body used to being able to run long distances. And so, if we were to want to have a place where we want, let's say, for example, a man wants to be able to make love to his partner for 2 to 3 hours, but he's watching porn for 2 to 3 minutes and always ending with an ejaculation, it's akin to training 100-meter sprints and then going out there and hoping you can run a marathon. Your body doesn't have the ability to be, or the awareness to be able to stretch into that space. And so the way to be able to get to a place of training to be able to have longer lovemaking sessions and to have lovemaking sessions where you are rewiring the neural pathways that we've ingrained over 5,000 ejaculations or however many we've had since we've been teenagers is to connect with your eros and not ejaculate every single time. So the combination of connecting with yourself in self-pleasuring while not outsourcing your pleasure to pornography or to running fantasy, and genuinely practicing by yourself and giving yourself 10 to 15, 20 minutes of self-pleasuring practice is another way to be able to get to that place, as far as I understand, to what you're talking about, which supports longer lovemaking sessions. It's going for a longer run instead of training the sprints and hoping you can run a marathon.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and it's so accurate, and it also just, requires a man and also a woman. A lot of women almost feel like if a man doesn't ejaculate in lovemaking, they've done something wrong. So if you're a woman listening
Mm-hmm.
to this, like, let go of that, and give some spaciousness, especially if your man is starting to practice more of a, semen retention. But the thing I say to men, if you really want to get masterful to last for more than 5 to 10 minutes, it's about the self pleasure. It's about being able to take yourself to a 7 or an 8, and then bring yourself back down to a 3 or a 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a lot
Mm-hmm.
easier to do it in your own self pleasure than, when your beautiful beloved is riding you, and you're like, oh my God, it's so good. It's like it's challenging.
Yeah.
You're just gonna end up
Mm-hmm.
ejaculating and then perpetuating the pattern.
That's
And
race
again,
day.
it's not
Yeah.
what's that?
That's like the marathon day, right? You got to be all the excitement of being with your beloved. You really have to have trained to be able to get to that edge and be able to pull back. And that's where the self pleasuring supports.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's just, to me, and the other question I see come up with self-pleasure or, semen retention is men are like, but I need to release the semen. The doctors are telling me I need to release the semen. And yeah, like for me, I find if I've gone over about a month and a half, I generally probably have an ejaculation. That's where I'm at. That's generally what feels good. Um, but what happens is just the process, you could call it transmutation. Basically, it's like if I have an ice cube in my hand right now, eventually that ice cube is going to begin to melt in. It's going to change form. So the seed,
Hmm.
the semen that's inside of your testicles, it has a transmutation capacity. So as you're breathing it through the body, it begins to transmute into energy, into form, into more of a multi-orgasmic state. And to connect the lines even more, the reason it's so important for a man to have a healthy emotional body to be multi-orgasmic is that if he doesn't have a healthy emotional body, when his body begins to get on that scale of 7 or 8 or 9, and he doesn't know how to breathe and sound and feel, the body says, I don't know what to do with all this intensity. Abort, abort. Like, get me out of this situation. So, ejaculation, you know, 2 or 3 second sneeze, and then the man goes back to sleep. But if you've trained your body to breathe, to feel, and to sound, then these are all the transmutation principles that help the body be able to take the seed, the semen, and be able to move it through your whole being.
Mm, so good. Can you speak into intentional ejaculation, like getting to this place of recognizing that, okay, I do actually want to ejaculate at a specific time? Like, what is the practice of perhaps bringing sacredness and to the intention that you use, and maybe the frame of sex magic for somebody that is interested in understanding a little bit more about when you do ejaculate? What could that practice look like for somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. Ejaculation, the first thing to understand with that is it's a sacred elixir. You and I are having this conversation because your mom and dad, my mom and dad came together, and seed and egg, sperm and egg met to create life. So the first important thing with a conscious ejaculation is a man having a healthy relationship with his own ejaculate. And that could mean a wide variety of different things. Like, there's an example. Two friends of mine who I teach with one of the school, they came across this guy years ago. They were out and about. I think they were in Australia. He was probably in his, like, I think late 70s,
Uh-huh.
and had this face that looked like, he was like 25. And they're like, all right, like, what's your secret? And he said, "You really want to know?" And I'm like, "Yeah, like, well, how do you have such a young face? Like, you're clearly, the rest of his body was a little bit older, but they could see his face was just so young." He's like, "When I was, 18, I met someone who instructed me one of the best things you can do is every day," and this is, I wouldn't say this is conscious ejaculation. This is just an example, the potency of seed. Every day or whenever you ejaculate, to take that seed and actually use it as a cream on your face. And so he had done that for his entire life, and so this man had an incredibly youthful face. That just shows the potency and the power of seed. A lot of men ejaculate and they're like, "Oh, I don't want anything near it." There's so much power to it. It might sound even crazy as well, and I'm sure this might trigger some men that are listening. But what if you were to even take the seed and, like, try your own seed to have a relationship the same way a woman who is bleeding might begin to have a relationship with her own blood, to have a relationship with your own seed. And then when it does come that time when, you feel that you're drawn to ejaculate, maybe you're making love, is to put a strong intention into it, to really, like, if you're not creating a child, like, what's the potency of what your seed wanting to represent? This is really the gateway into sex magic. It's a gateway into taking the ineffable, the intentionalities, the manifestation, and grounding it into ritual and practice that can begin to make changes in your day-to-day world, so that when you do ejaculate, you're ejaculating into matter, you're ejaculating into creation, and you're utilizing it as a powerful tool for manifestation.
I love it so much. And there's so much in there. I want to say that for anybody listening to this, whether you're going to ejaculate or not, I think it's a really powerful thing is to set an intention with your beloved before you start making love. What is it that you want to call into your life? You know, the act of lovemaking has the power to bring another being into this matrix. And when you hold an intention of what else you want to manifest, like you said, bro, you know, it's a really powerful time to hold that intention in this sacred lovemaking space and to be able to call it in by connecting to this powerful energy of creation. And so, yeah, I love that. I love that practice. I also want to say to anybody else about the thing that may trigger them is I wish we would all just grow up about our bodily fluids. You know, we're all so freaked out by it. But you know, like urine cycling is really good practice. You know, why would your body not know exactly what your body needs in order to be able to support you through practices like drinking your own urine? And for people that have not looked into that, it's something you might want to look into. But the same thing, like if you think about how powerful your seed is, it's got the power to bring another being into this matrix and make it live for 80 or 90 years. Why would that not be nourishing for your skin or to replenish that energy by putting it back into your own mouth and develop a conscious relationship with it? I think it's really, really powerful. And as soon as we give ourselves permission to do that, it lets go of a lot of the shame that we've been putting into our rugby sock and putting into the laundry rather than actually just being present with just how powerful that is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Talk to me about your new podcast. It has the title Leadership in it, along with a couple of other terms that don't seem to go with leadership. But I'd love to hear the title of the podcast and what you're thinking about bringing to the world through that creation.
Yeah, so it's called Love, Sex, and Leadership. And to me, these are kind of my worlds coming together. I've been teaching around sexuality for many years now. I'm the Piscean soul in me that loves love and loves to, write and understand and teach about love, and not just romantic love, but like love that's connected to pure spirit, that's pure, God consciousness, if you will, and how these two pieces weave themselves into the place of, are we showing up as a leader in our tribe, in our community, in our family, and how can we move through the shame that we might have around our sexuality to embrace more love so that we path the way forward as the leader emanating the wisdom of our soul moving forward into the world. So yeah, the podcast is set up. It's some of my live teachings and recordings from some of the workshops and retreats that I do. I'm having a lot of beautiful conscious conversations with colleagues and friends and fellow teachers and speakers in this field. And then yeah, it's also some previous interviews and things I've done. Like when I launched my book, I did a bunch of amazing interviews then with great, world class speakers and teachers. So it's kind of a infusion of a few different things all coming together. I'll be releasing an episode once a week, and beyond that for quite a while. There's a lot of content out there that I'm looking forward to sharing.
Great. What makes a good leader? What's the definition of a good leader for you?
Yeah, I love this question. A good leader has the capacity to listen deeply, as well as a capacity to go against the grain, to go against the common. If everyone's going one way, the good leader has the capacity not to always go the other way, but to listen to the directionalities that both decisions bring forth and be able to make an embodied decision from the heart. A good leader to me is one that isn't just leading from the mind that's trying to have power over people, but actually from an embodied awareness inside that celebrates the leadership in others and isn't trying to validate his own ego and his own leadership through his decision makings or her decision makings. A good leader simply brings others onto his or her shoulders so that he can then rise and they all can rise together. So a good leader is integrating all of these different pieces together and has the capacity to create new ways of being on this planet, and create a level of listening deeply to the heart that I feel like a lot of leaders think that, are only focused around, again, logic, reason, understanding. A good leader to me is deeply embodied.
Brings you all the way back to your book.
Mm.
Share share your recent journey. I know this is something you spend a lot of time doing. You recently did a juice fast. Talk about why you did that, what some of the benefits were, and why you have that as a practice in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, I try to do, I do every year, sometimes more than once a year, some sort of juicing or cleansing or purifying, some time where I let my digestive system just have a little bit of a rest. Juicing, I really enjoy. I've heard studies saying you do juicing for 30 days and every cell in your body totally gets changed around. So it's a really great process of just listening more deeply and letting some of the systems and the organs and the pieces inside the body begin to purify themselves more and more. And with juicing, there's different supplements I take. I usually am doing enemas. I'm giving time each day for my body to slow down so that I can really purify itself from within.
So good. I'm sure that's also an entire podcast on its own.
For sure.
What's one of the topics that you like to speak about that we haven't yet spoken about on this episode, bro? What's something you want to bring?
Yeah,
Doesn't
I
have to be
mean,
about men's work. It can be anything.
yeah, I think what's exciting or necessary or interesting to me, I always like to speak about the things that a listener who's tuning in can actually make a change in their day-to-day life. And the thing I want to say and speak into is that I hear sometimes people, they're sitting back and they're, watching Netflix, and they're, expecting the world to change, but they're not dragoning the difference. They're not, inspiring and saying, hey, I want something to be different. Then go out there and do it. Like I say this to men all the time. They're like, there's no men's circles in my local community. I'm like, raise your hand. You're the leader. If there's no circles in your community, go be the leader. If there's
Yeah.
something you want differently in your community, stand up and make the change. Like, that's where things change. When we just sit back and we get upset because things aren't happening the way that we want them, then go out and inspire. If you inspire one person today simply with the wisdom inside of you to make a change in the world, and that makes such a difference. And I think that conversation, is so necessary, because people are often waiting for a permission field. They're waiting for someone to show up to say, hey, you can go do this. I want to say
Hmm.
right now, if there's something you've been sitting on for a long time, you've been like, I'm waiting for that day, I'm waiting for that moment, waiting for that celestial moment in time when all the stars are going to align. Well, guess what? It's happening right now. It's happening
Right.
right now when you're listening to this podcast, listening to the sound of my voice. Go and do it, because that's the way our world becomes a better place. That's the way our world begins to be inspired by those that are willing to make those changes.
Mic drop. I think that's a good place to say thank you so much for making the time for this, bro. I love seeing what you're putting out into the world. It feels good to have you, like a brother in the same space, supporting men. I feel just how potent this work has been for me, like unraveling some of the shame and guilt that I've had around my own sexuality, getting to a space of feeling deeply connected and vulnerable with other men. It's just been fucking transformational for me. And it's the reason that I have this show and I do the work that I do. And feeling you and your power and how much life force you're putting behind this is, it's an honor to call you a friend and a brother. So thank you, my man.
No, you're very welcome. And thank you for holding these and inspiring the way and doing the work you're doing with the man, and, and holding the strong relationship point as well. And yeah, really celebrate you, man. You're a beautiful brother, and I'm grateful that you're in my life.
Thanks, man. I will. include it in the show notes, but where can people get hold of you if they want to see what you're up to? Where can they get the book? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, so if you're on Instagram, you look up the Soul Navigator, SOUL Navigator. You can find all of my links and everything there. If you go onto the website, it's just my first name, Aaron, Aaron, Kleinerman, KleinerMan.com, and you can find all the information there. And if you go to the Embodied Man book, you can find that leads right to the page. So
Epic, brother. Can't wait till we can connect in person and give you a hug in person. But for coming on here, I really appreciate it. And yeah, till we meet again, bro. Much love.
absolutely. Thank you, brother. Ciao.
Ciao.